.NET for Devices presents EvenTiles Part 11 Debugging Periodic Agents. Hello, welcome once again to EvenTiles. We take off where we left in the previous part. So we had a background or a periodic agent, and we found out in part 10 that it's kind of hard to debug that periodic agent because it's running approximately once every 30 minutes by just calling that add method on the scheduled action service. So in today's episode we're going to take a look at how debugging can be made easier for us by more frequently calling our periodic agent. And in order to do that, I'm just going to add some conditional compilation. So the first thing I'm going to do is define a constant, and that constant will only be defined if we are in debug mode. So in debug mode, what I'm going to do is define an additional debug task, and that will only be set if we are indeed running our application in debug mode. And if we are in debug mode, what we can do is call a separate different method on the scheduled action service. And that's what we're gonna do right now, just immediately after adding our periodic agent to the scheduled action service. So if we are having a debug task defined, what we're going to do is on that scheduled action service we're going to call another static method being launch4test, and that launch4test accepts the name of our periodic agent as the first parameter and a time span, or as a matter of fact a number of seconds, after which that periodic agent will be scheduled, and we just are setting that right now to 30 seconds. And what this means is that our periodic agent will run once after 30 seconds, making it easier to debug that periodic agent. Now that will only happen in debug mode, so if we change to release mode you can immediately see that that launch4test is now grayed out, so it cannot execute in release mode, which is a good thing because in release mode it is not allowed to actually use that particular method. I can also change the value of that constant there in order to also in debug mode allow my periodic agent to run on the 30-minute schedule. So this is a very convenient way to test our periodic agent, but also to assure that I not accidentally ship with that launch4test enabled in release mode, because then my application would not be certified. Now in my periodic agent I'm going to set a breakpoint on my notify complete call, and hopefully this time after 30 seconds we will get a hit on that particular breakpoint. So I'm starting the application. We are going to add a tile to our main screen, but first what you can see is that our breakpoint currently looks disabled, and the reason for that is that our background agent or our periodic test has not executed yet, so its debug symbols are not available inside Visual Studio's debugger. So we created our secondary tile here, and that secondary tile is still fully functional, so it has the backside containing some content as well. And what you can see is that Visual Studio just continues running even though our application was moved to the background. And now we're just waiting for our periodic test to fire after 30 seconds, and we should be able to see some status information inside Visual Studio. So you quickly saw launching periodic agent popping up, and there we are just stopping on the breakpoint right now. And we have a full debugging experience. So if I'm going to take a look at that past parameter task, I can see for instance the description of our periodic agent. We can also see its expiration time being January 12, 2012, or in other words 14 days from the time I recorded this particular episode of EvenTiles, because a periodic agent will expire after 14 days of running, and that is defined here in this particular maximum life property. So if we are not renewing our schedule within 14 days, that periodic task will expire. And that just allows us to not drain the battery thanks to our application. Now, if I'm continuing running, and right now we are continuing running, what will happen is that now our periodic agent will just run under the normal schedule. So approximately every 30 minutes it will fire. And that's still not an ideal situation, because what if we are passing data between our application and our periodic agent? Well, we want to test that probably frequently. So for now, it's, like still not an ideal situation, because what you can clearly see already is that, hey, our periodic agent is not firing anytime soon, at least. We still have our application fully functional. So our application was in the background. We brought it back to the foreground, and we terminated the application. And still, Visual Studio's debugger is connected to our application, because our background agent is still running, and we can take a look inside the emulator to see that, because if we go to background tasks, you see that EvenTiles background task is still on. So what we're going to do now is change our application slightly in order to have more frequent executions of our background or periodic agent. And in order to do that, now we're going to work inside our scheduled agent.cs file, and we're going to do a similar thing. So again, we're going to make use of conditional compilation here. I'm just going to define the same constant in the same way, so only in debug mode that particular constant will be defined, and that is again to guarantee that we are not accidentally calling that launch for test method in release mode, because that would make our application fail certification. So if we are debugging our periodic agent, well, then we again set that launch for task, and this time we're going to use the parameter task, its name property, to specify the name of our periodic task here. And we're going to set the same number of seconds here, but in fact I could set any time of seconds here for our periodic task to be rescheduled. So I'm again going to take 30 seconds here, but it could have been, like 60 or whatever value I would have in mind there. And what happens now is that each time our periodic task is running, and each time we call the notify complete, it will be scheduled immediately to run again after 30 seconds. So we are starting the application again. I'm quickly going to remove and add our secondary tile to our start screen again. We're also making sure that our breakpoint is still set in our scheduled agent, and we're just going to wait for another 30 seconds here. And once again, our application is still fully functional, and the added functionality is just that we have our periodic agent running, and even if our tile is moving, like from foreside to backside, what you can see is that simultaneously our periodic agent can even execute, because it's running completely independent from the way our tile is scheduled to display its front or its backside. After we interrupted execution of our scheduled agent, we immediately continued starting Visual Studio again, or in the debugger starting debugging again. And now we're just going to wait to see if we hit that breakpoint again, because that is proof that we now frequently will hit that breakpoint thanks to the fact that we have integrated that launch for task method also inside our periodic agent. Well, that is the way you can debug periodic agents, and that is the topic for today's EvenTiles episode. The next time we're going to talk about adding functionality to our periodic agent. So I hope to welcome you for that video as well. Thanks for watching this time, and hopefully until the next episode of EvenTiles.